you a chance. I wanna have a part of Eddie in the stranger dance. 'Cause he used to soul fight the Duke, he kidnaps the Queen.
And we're off. Welcome to the Saratogian Sports Podcast. My name is Christopher Maley, and I'm joined by co-host David Johnson.
How you doing?
So this is our first segment of a weekly podcast we plan to do here every Monday afternoon at the Saratogian. We figured it was a good idea to start this week because the high school football playoff seedings were determined yesterday at the Section 2 seedings meeting. So we have the first round of the playoffs coming up Friday and Saturday. So we're just going to go through each of the games and give you our analysis, predictions, thoughts, anything of that nature. And the first thing we're going to start with is Saratoga Springs, who is traveling to face LaSalle on Friday at 7 p.m. Saratoga is 3-2, and so is LaSalle. Saratoga beat the Cadets 49-28 in the first week, so this is a rematch, and Saratoga is obviously the favorite going into this game.
Yeah, I actually covered that game. It was the first week of the season, and those Ryan Manlapaz had 3 touchdowns and an interception in that game. He pretty much did whatever he wanted every time he touched the ball. And
well, he had 4 touchdowns, right? Because he had a kick return as well.
Yes, 3 touchdowns rushing. And Brian Williams, his first game as quarterback, varsity level, 2 touchdowns. So they sprinted out to an early lead, and LaSalle just couldn't catch up. Saratoga's scoring, 1 minute, 30-second drives. And LaSalle, when they did move the ball, quarterback Joe Germanario was, completing some passes, but it just wasn't enough to, match the firepower of Saratoga Springs' offense that day.
Well, I looked at the stats, and LaSalle had 95 plays from scrimmage that game compared to only 35 for Saratoga, yet Saratoga almost doubled them up. So, how interesting was that to see, and do you think Saratoga needs to rely on a quick strike offense going into Friday's game as well?
I mean, when your plays are going for 50 and 60 yards, you don't need many to score. So, and that's exactly what was happening. It seemed like every time they got in the field on the first half, it was, they scored within a couple minutes. So that's why they didn't. The disparity of plays was that great. LaSalle was just dinking and dunking down the field, and Saratoga was able to stop it.
Yeah, Terry Jones isn't going to complain, right, when you get plays of 50 and 60 yards.
No, they'll take that every week if they could.
I agree. But junior quarterback Brian Williams has really stepped it up for Saratoga, especially in recent weeks. Last week was arguably their biggest win of the season over Boston Spa, where they clinched the 3 seed in the Empire Division, forcing a matchup with LaSalle. If they had lost, they would have had to have faced Shaker, who Boston Spa is going to face this Friday. But anyways, Brian Williams conducted 3 first-half drives last week of more than 11 plays. The offense seems to be finding its groove. They have a lot of balance with Manlapaz, Houghton, running the ball, but they're using Luke Thompson and Nick Anderson more in the passing game, and I think their protection, their offensive line protection has really stepped it up the past couple of weeks. I think, their secondary is going to have another big game, honestly, against LaSalle. They held Germanario to 15 for 38 passing in the first week, and, 39% completion percentage. I don't think it's going to get it done against Saratoga this time around. The Blue Streak secondary has really stepped it up the past couple of weeks. From what I've seen, Thompson, Anderson, Houghton, Manlapaz. People like to point out the Shen game and how, the Plainsmen had a lot of explosive passing plays down the field. But I think that was a cause of Saratoga's defense just breaking down as a whole. There wasn't a lot of pressure. They weren't stopping the running game. So I don't know if Saratoga's secondary can be totally to blame for that game. And ever since that week, they've really come into their own, and I think it's become sort of a strength for the Blue Streaks.
So you think Saratoga's the favorite, even though they'll be on the road this week?
Yeah, I do think Saratoga's the favorite, even though they're technically the lower seed. I think their division is much stronger with Shen and CBA at the top. Meanwhile, LaSalle in the Liberty division, Shaker is number 1, who is obviously extremely talented, but under LaSalle there isn't a lot of high-quality football teams, I wouldn't say.
All right, you want to move on to the next game?
Sure, we have Colony headed to Shenenedehowa. On Friday night at 7 p.m., Shenenedehowa is the top seed in the Empire Division. And honestly, I've been completely ridiculous this season, just setting school records. Ryan Van Galen is sporting an 18-1 touchdown to interception ratio, which is, you can't really exaggerate that stat right there. Jordan Zloger has become his go-to receiver. He's first in the entire Capital Region with 728 receiving yards, second with 9 touchdowns, and their chemistry is basic. I know I've seen a couple of their games this season, and it reminds me a lot of Aaron Rodgers to Jordy Nelson on the Packers. I don't know if you guys watch the NFL a lot, but Jordy Nelson seems to have a telepathic connection with Aaron Rodgers, especially on those back shoulder throws. They always know where one another is going to be. And comparing that to the high school level, I see a lot of that in Van Galen and Zloger. They've definitely worked hard this offseason to perfect their routes and their timing. That being said, Shenenedehowa is absolutely the favorite against Colony going into this week. They beat Colony 49-6 in week 2. And I honestly don't see any way that Colony is able to pull off the upset, so that's really all we have to say about this game. The next game we have to go to is Boston Spa, who is going to travel to Shaker, the top seed in the Liberty Division, Friday night. The Scotties are going to the playoffs for the first time under head coach Dave Morello, but they run into a juggernaut in the Blue Bison, who have been undefeated in league play this season. Shaker has a really balanced offense with Andrew Bolton and Ryan Duda at running backs. It's a solid 1-2 punch. They don't throw the ball a ton, but Seamus McHugh is a big play waiting to happen from the wide receiver position. Quarterback Matt Woods is 6'3". He hasn't thrown an interception all year. And Shaker doesn't really give you a lot of opportunities throughout the game. They really take care of the football. It's kind of their MO. And, if you want to beat this team, you're going to have to come up with explosive plays. And I think that's where Boston Spa running back Matt Hommel comes into play. He's been one of the best running backs in the entire Capital Region this year for the Scotties. He has over 1,000 yards. Basically, he has the entire package: speed, strength. He's small in stature, so he's able to hide behind Boston Spa's big offensive line. Even though you have to feel good for Boston Spa to make the playoffs, I think the buck stops here, and Shaker gets the job done and moves on to the semifinals.
From last week's game against Saratoga, that was a really close game. What from that game would they need to do better to, sort of stop Shaker on offense? Or
I think Derek Chandler is going to they might have to pass to set up the run. I know they're a triple option team, but I just don't see them being to wear down Shaker this Friday with a running game. Obviously, Boston Spa's running game is really physical at the point of attack, but they're undoubtedly going to need to hit a lot of explosive passing plays. And Derek Chandler, they hit a lot of intermediate routes last week, but they weren't really accurate on the short balls, especially on swing passes and screens and simple things like that. And they're going to need to execute all the simple things against Shaker this Friday. So I guess we'll see what happens.
Okay, do you want to move on to Class A games?
Yeah, absolutely. This game. It's going to be the number 2 seed Burnt Hills at the number 3 seed Troy. It's going to be televised on Time Warner Cable Sports Channel on local channel 50. This is a rematch from week 3 when Burnt Hills beat Troy 40-14 in pretty dominant fashion.
Yeah, another rematch, and I'm not sure if we're going to see anything different this time. The one question mark is last week Burnt Hills were shut out at home, which is very surprising. It's their first home loss since 2005, and against Queensbury, the top seed. So they're going to definitely want to bounce back in this game. But the question mark comes from senior running back Dan Maynard. He suffered what looked like an ankle injury early in the second half. He got it taped up, but they didn't bring him back into the game. I'm not sure if that's because he couldn't go back in the game or they were down by so much they didn't want to risk him any further damage to that ankle. So it'll be a question to see if he plays against Troy. But honestly, the first time it was all Burnt Hills. Troy actually did score first, but after that, Maynard and Leveroni combined for more than 300 yards rushing, so almost 400. So they're going to look to lean on them again. And John Clayton has actually been passing the ball pretty well. Even against Queensbury, he hit some receivers for yards. So
Yeah, well, he's really stepped it up as a junior, wouldn't you say?
yeah, big. I mean, coming as a sophomore on that type of high quality team was impressive. But this year, he's looked even more comfortable.
Right.
And even more so as the season's gone on.
Playing devil's advocate, how do you think, if Troy were to pull off the upset here, what do you think they would need to do?
Well, against Queensbury, Burnt Hills really was susceptible to the run. I mean, obviously Queensbury has a massive offensive line.
Yeah.
I don't think Troy can match that. But Burnt Hills did have trouble just finding who was carrying the ball and stopping them. So, and Elijah Bethel for Troy, maybe someone who can take advantage of that and try and run up the yards just like Queensbury did on the ground.
Yeah, he's had a very good year for the Flying Horses. I don't know if they have enough playmakers across the board to match Burnt Hill's scoring output. So I think we're on the same page that Troy is going to be eliminated on Friday.
It felt last week that the Burnt Hills Queensbury game was just sort of a preview of what will be them meeting again in the playoffs, probably the Super Bowl.
Right. Well, we're going to move on to Class B now. We have Albany Academy is traveling to face undefeated Schuylerville, who has had a really impressive season. Albany Academy is the number 4 seed from the Rhineford Division. Schuylerville is the number 1 seed from the West Division. This is a rematch from Week 5 when the Black Horses defeated Albany Academy 42-7 and held them scoreless in the first half. Head coach John Bowen has done a really impressive job with the Black Horses. Last year they started 1-5 before finishing 4-5. But he brought a lot of his sophomores up last year and kind of threw them into the fire to get some experience playing at the varsity level. And now he has what he was quoted at the beginning of the year as saying he has a seasoned group of juniors, which is absolutely what has been the case, and he's proved that right. They had, their rushing game has been dynamic to say the least. They've totaled more than 2,700 yards on the ground as a team. Quarterback Will Griffin and halfbacks Josh Thomas and Zach Pierce have really formed an explosive trio in the backfield and styles that complement each other, which makes it tough for any opposing defense to contain. I think we're looking at blowout city here. What do you think, Dave?
I actually covered that first meeting between the two, another rematch, and honestly, it didn't matter who was running the ball for Schuylerville. They were running down the field and pretty easily. So unless something unusual happens, I can't see Schuylerville suffering their first loss of the season, so I expect them to move on.
I would agree with that. Now we're going to move on to Class C, which I think of all the teams that we cover after Saratogian, this is the matchup of the week for sure. We have number 6 Mechanicville, who's lost one time this season, traveling to face number 3 Voorheesville. This is a rematch from earlier in the year when the Blackbirds beat Mechanicville 10-7 in a defensive grinded-out battle. So obviously that was the Red Raiders' only loss this season was to Voorheesville. Senior halfback Chase De Los Santos broke the single-season rushing record for Mechanicville last week. Basically, has been one of the best running backs in the Capital Region. I know Dave has covered him a lot and has gotten to know him a little better than me as far as interviews off the field. What kind of sets him apart as a high school athlete, would you say? I mean, to have 1,700 rushing yards this season, you almost can't put that into words through 7 games.
I talked to Coach Kevin Collins after last game, just asking him, when did he know that he had something special in Chase? And he said, he did fine as a freshman, but as a sophomore, he really stood out. And he just put in so much work, just dedicated himself to football and training, just getting himself stronger and faster. And it's really showed as a senior. He's had some ridiculous rushing games of more than 300 yards where he'll just take it inside, take it outside, bounce it outside. I mean, it doesn't really matter. He's even caught some swing passes and been successful there. I mean, when the ball's in his hands, he's just tough to bring down, and he finishes runs as well.
Right.
So he just racks up the yards in every way possible.
Thinking back to the last matchup between these two teams, It was 0-0 at halftime. Voorheesville had a field goal in the third quarter. Then Mechanicville finally, on their last drive of the game with a couple minutes left, scored a touchdown to go ahead 7-3 on a Chase De Los Santos 2-yard run. But immediately, Robert Denman, the quarterback for Voorheesville, leads him on a game-winning drive, capped off by a 4-yard touchdown run by Matt Feller, and that's how Voorheesville came out on top 10-7. Looking at this week's matchup, I think in such a tightly contested matchup, it's going to come down to quarterback play and who makes the clutch throw in the fourth quarter. And I think Voorheesville has the edge in that regard, which is why I think Voorheesville is going to win this game once again. Quarterback Robert Denman has a 10-1 touchdown interception ratio. He also has seven rushing touchdowns on the ground. Matt Feller is top 5 in the Capital Region in rushing yards. They really have a balanced offense that is, difficult to stop. And as well as Mechanicville's defense played in the first game, they're definitely going to be tested yet again. It'll be interesting to see what type of adjustments they make to Robert Denman as a quarterback. Mechanicville's own quarterback, Brandon Russell, he's had a really good year, but I don't know if he's able to get the job done on Saturday. He's only had 64 pass attempts this year, and in a close game like this, they're definitely going to need to air it out, especially in crunch time. And it remains to be seen who is going to make the clutch catch and if Russell is able to make that clutch throw. But that being said, anything can happen in this matchup. It was only a field goal separating the two teams last time. So really looking forward to that matchup. And, the winner of that game will probably be favored in the semifinals the next week.
And one wild card here, Mechanicville in their regular season finale against Holy Trinity, it was a close game in the first half, and they started working kicker Jacob Hennes at halftime, just practicing field goals, and he was hitting them pretty comfortably from 30 yards out. In a close game like this, if they have confidence in their kicker, that could give them, an edge. It was a field goal difference the first time, maybe be that.
Yeah, special teams could play a role. We haven't even talked about special teams this whole podcast, but that is a unit that has a big impact every week, and they, special teams can win games for you. And I know coaches preach that, and it's just as important a phase as offense and defense. Well, we're going to stay with Class C with the number 4 versus 5 matchup, which is also probably one of the best matchups of the week other than Mechanicville Voorheesville. Coxsackie Athens is going to travel with a 5-2 record into Corinth, who is 4-3. It's going to be played Friday night at 7 p.m. Corinth has had a really fine season on the ground, led by running backs Alex Jenkins and Anthony Abar. They've compiled 1,784 rushing yards. Quarterback Chance Baldo has a 7-1 touchdown interception ratio, and is also an effective threat on the ground, making Corinth's offense, three-headed monster, very difficult to contain. The thing about Coxsackie Athens is the one time I saw them this year against Greenwich, they lost in pretty mind-boggling fashion. They forced 5 turnovers as a team, and they still ended up losing 21-18 to the Witches. So maybe they're just not an opportunistic team. I don't know. That's a small sample size. I know running back Sam Palmatier is really talented for Coxsackie Athens, but he hasn't really been consistent enough, I wouldn't say. He disappeared against Greenwich and also against Fonda Fultonville. James Squire is explosive and probably will need to step it up in the passing game for Coxsackie Athens. The one thing, if you want to look at other teams and how they fared versus Corinth and Coxsackie Athens, Corinth only lost to Fonda 34-33 last week, which is highly impressive. Meanwhile, Coxsackie lost to Fonda 34-7 earlier in the year. Now, I don't know if those games are going to be indicative of what happens on Friday night, but I think it's a pretty good barometer to tell you, Corinth is going to compete hard and is probably the favorite in this game. Wouldn't you say, Dave?
Yeah, that'd be my guess. They had their first home playoff game in program history last year, and they did really well to get back there and get another home date this year.
Yeah, it should be an interesting matchup, to say the least. Now, the last game we're going to talk about from Class C is number 7 Greenwich, who's traveling to face number 2 Fonda Fultonville Saturday afternoon at 2 p.m. The Witches, in their first playing at Class C, earned a wild card berth based on quarter points in a very complex Class C playoff system, which has been well known to confuse everybody known to man.
I don't think we have enough room on the tape to go over that system, so we'll just skip that and say they made the playoffs.
All right. Well, you have to say congrats to the Witches. Coach Brandon Lynette took them to the postseason in their first year playing at Class C. They're obviously have been a traditionally Class D team. With all that said, Fonda Fultonville is an extremely tough matchup. They're outscoring teams 293-95 this year. Pat Hart has been one of the best running backs in all of Class C. For Greenwich has won 5 games, but honestly, I don't think any of their 5 wins have been super impressive, other than Kosaki, but that honestly might have been a fluky win anyways, considering they had a punt return and a fumble return for a touchdown. The Witches, that is, during that game. I still think Greenwich is a year away. They're still pretty young. Their quarterback, Lucas Whitehouse, is a junior. Running back Mike Brandow is a junior. It just hasn't been consistent week to week for the Witches this year. But I think given another year, when they grow up as seniors next fall, they could really do some damage in the playoffs. But I do think Greenwich is going to come up short against Fonda here on Saturday afternoon.
All right, we're going to switch gears from high school football to the NFL, where we watched Peyton Manning set the all-time touchdown passing record Sunday night. And I guess the question I want to ask is, he came into the league with such potential. He was preordained, the golden arm, and for the most part, he's lived up to those expectations. People can argue about Super Bowls versus playoff success and some other quarterbacks, but he's really just been on a straight course to setting this record. And to me, it's just surprising that I feel like we took it for granted that he set the record at all, given that he had a surgery a couple years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. We basically have taken Peyton Manning's entire career for granted, considering how dominant he's been. You could argue he's been one of the most dominant athletes in sports history. He's definitely up there, not even talking about the NFL, but he's really just that great an athlete. I think yesterday, after he caught that touchdown pass, when you saw him go up the sidelines and have all of his teammates, all 52 of them, or however many are on a roster. Was it 52, 53? 54? 53, all right, I was one off. But yeah, every single teammate individually high-fived him, and, it's just amazing to see the best player on your team is also the hardest worker on your team, and as a teammate of somebody, I played collegiate sports, high school sports, you really appreciate somebody like that, and you really, just want him to do the best, and obviously you're glad on his team because he's so good.
You can tell he really wanted that record too. During the Wes Welker touchdown that tied the record, he almost he threw a little hissy fit when they went to review it. He's like, "It was good. It was good."
So that was the biggest hissy fit you'll see Peyton Manning throw. But no, he was definitely super happy to get that touchdown record. You had to feel good for him. You saw Colin Kaepernick even smiling on the sidelines. The 49ers defensive end, his name is not coming to mind, but right after they showed the replay of when Peyton Manning threw it in the pocket, they showed the 49ers defensive player lip-syncing, "Congratulations, man," and tapping him on the back. And I think really his icon has grown throughout the NFL. The fact that he's 39 or 40 years old, some of these young players looked up to him in high school, growing up playing high school football, playing football in their backyard, and now they're in the same league as him. And it's almost surreal from their standpoint, and from a fan standpoint, he just continues to be surreal. So, yeah, I guess we'll see. Would you say the Broncos right now are the favorite to win the Super Bowl after 7 weeks of action?
Well, it looks like they have the easiest path in the AFC. There hasn't really been a contender, make a name for themselves yet.
Right.
The Chargers had a good start, but they lost.
They sort of come back down to earth, right?
Yeah. Obviously anything can happen in the playoffs, and that's, they're the best bet right now to have a home playoff game, in the AFC championship. So
I don't think there's any doubt about it. I know it's hard to judge NFL teams and who's going to win the Super Bowl through 7 weeks of a 16-week gauntlet of a schedule, but yeah, I would say the Broncos are the favorite in the AFC right now. We'll see what happens in the NFC. The Cowboys and Eagles are probably looking like the two best teams as it stands today, but obviously the Seahawks can make a run. The Cardinals have been impressive. Nobody wants to win the NFC South, apparently, because the Saints, Falcons, Bucks, and Panthers are just playing so poorly right now. So I guess we'll see what happens.
Well, the big question is, how did you do in fantasy this week?
Well...
Or is that off the record?
No, this is on. I need Le'Veon Bell to score 31 points tonight, and then I win. So I'm wondering what odds I can get for that. I don't know.
So you're a Steelers fan tonight.
Oh, yeah. I'm a Steelers fan tonight. But yeah, I don't know if he's going to score 31. But in the league that I'm 5-1 in, I'm going against DeAndre Hopkins, and if he scores 6 points, then I lose. So I think I'm going to lose, and I'm just praying for the best there.
Well, the good news is that Ryan Fitzpatrick is still the starting quarterback for the Texans, right?
That is a good point.
Okay. So you got something going for you then.
Yeah, they featured Andre Johnson a little more in the passing game recently. DeAndre Hopkins is talented but inconsistent, but obviously with my luck as a fantasy player, this is probably the week that he breaks out for 10 catches and 150 yards. So
that sounds about right. All right. Well, this has been fun. I hope it's been entertaining for everyone else listening.
Yeah, we plan to do a lot more of these. Next Monday, we'll do an NBA preview for the upcoming basketball season, which starts October 29th on Tuesday, I believe. We'll go through a rundown of our projected top 8 seeds in the East and top 8 seeds in the West, and it should be pretty exciting. Me and Dave are pretty big basketball fans, and we're looking forward to that segment of our podcast next week.
And of course, more high school playoff things to talk about.
Absolutely.
Soccer, field hockey, football have all would have gotten underway next week. So
yeah, we'll definitely keep it local first and foremost, and then we'll go to professional sports because we like them just as much.
So follow us on Twitter, at Saratoga Sports, or you could follow me at DavidMichael10, or Chris.
CMALE 730.
All right. Talk to you next week.
Thanks a lot for joining us.
Do you know the two sides of pursuit that ain't team?